Okay, back again for part 2. Okay, so in the event chart, or the chart 3:58 p.m. on the 31st of May 1985, when Shari Faye Smith was abducted by Larry Jean Bell, the ruler of the perpetrator, or Larry Jean Bell, is Mars, and the ruler of the victim, Shari Faye Smith, is Venus. And we can see this is a viable chart because Mars and Venus are nearly exactly semi-sextiling each other. So they're making contact with each other. So that sort of makes this chart a very viable chart. But not only that, we now know that Larry Jean Bell pretty much documented most things that he did and had things timed very well and had planned on abducting Shari Faye at 4 p.m. And he actually abducted Debra May at the same time. I think we'll just have a flick over to that chart now. Okay, so this is the chart when Debra May Helmick was abducted. So Shari hadn't been found by this point. She was still missing. The family had received a letter by Shari, written by Shari. It was actually a last will and testament, and I'll go back to that in a minute. That's really, really very sad. Then on the 14th of June, so some 14 days later, he brazenly just walks into the garden and takes Debra May Helmick, the little 9-year-old, just grabs her and walks away, in front of other people, in fact. So he was spotted. People could describe what he looked like and what car he was in. You know, he was desperate to take somebody. So, you know, obviously by this point he already killed Shari and he was ready to move on to his next victim. So now we look at this chart, and again, it's a completely different day. There's no reason why it would be the same, but it is. Libra is rising on the ascendant there, the same as the last chart. Now, she was taken again at 3:58 p.m. So that actually gives the reason why it's a Libra rising. Okay, so her ruler, Debra May, is Venus again, like the last time with Shari, and once again it's sitting there in the 7th house. Okay, the same. So that's an interesting thing to note. We've got a repetitive pattern already. Okay, there we have the Sun in Gemini. Again, there's the double sign as well as the Libra, 2 people. And there's the Sun sitting in the 8th house of death in Gemini. She's the second person to die at the hands of this man. Now, the ruler of him, again, is Mars. But this time, Mars has moved into Cancer. So Mars has moved a little bit, but now it's conjunct Mercury. So it's really coming full circle as to how communication and Mercury and Hermes and all things like Gemini factored into this. He wrote and told everything, and that is here. Okay, now the Pluto, which is a malefic planet in these event charts, is right there conjunct the ascendant, so that's not a good sign either. And the fact that it's opposing Venus and the moon, which is her co-ruler. So this is Debra May right here, all of her, she's right in there. Excuse my puppy dog, sorry. Right in front of Larry Jean Bell. She had no way to get away from him. And the fact that these are in Taurus, the moon and Venus are in Taurus, she was just sitting in her garden, and that's a Taurus thing. She was taken away very quickly, which is an Aries thing, and a Mars trait is very quick action. So she was quickly scooped up and taken away from her garden in front of her family, her mother, and a woman that saw her. There's the moon there. A woman actually saw her being taken, but couldn't chase the car and couldn't stop him from taking her. So once again, now we have Mars in the 9th house, again still, but in a different sign. Mercury's in the 9th house as well. So there's that religious stuff. Okay, now religion is shown by the 9th house. So the 9th house cusp is in fact really, really close. So I'll try and get the exact degrees. The 9th house cusp is actually in Gemini. So he has very conflicting feelings in regard to God. And that became apparent when he made made Shari write a letter to her family, and the phone calls that he made. He expressed his love for Shari and feeling that God was wanted them to be together. It was God's plan and God's work. So it was very much based on his religious beliefs that he was going to be combined together. Their souls were going to be combined. And they would be reunited in heaven, and everybody would forgive him and everything would be fine. And, you know, he's just absolutely full of delusions, that guy. I'm going to just go back to Shari's abduction chart for a minute. So the 9th house again here is Gemini. Very conflicting religious beliefs. And the fact that we have Neptune exactly sextiling Pluto, and then that is trining Mars there in the 9th house, he appears to be hearing God as a person that's telling him to do something. So I think he's also, you know, got a dissociative disorder or some sort of personality disorder that splits him into two different people. And he thinks that he's hearing things. Neptune is, or can be, delusions. So in relation to Mars here and Pluto being all connected, in fact it's connected into a mystic rectangle, it very much shows that this guy is in a deluded religious state at this time. Okay, we'll go back to Debra Mays. Okay, so by this time the mystic rectangle had dissipated, it's gone. So he really believed by this time that he was going to be all forgiven for this and we'll be going to heaven anyway. And he, throughout his years, begged for forgiveness of Shari's family, especially. Sadly, he actually got that forgiveness. I personally wouldn't forgive him. But for the family, it was necessary for them to be able to move on, to be able to forgive him. He was ultimately executed, which he deserved to be because the man was sick. But good on the family, I suppose, for being able to forgive him and move on. Okay. This chart here is actually the timed chart for the last will and testament that Shari Faye Smith wrote after being told to do so by Larry, and then this was sent to her family, this letter. Now, I don't want to put a copy of the letter up here because it's just horrible. It's gut-wrenching. She knows what's going to happen to her. She knows that she's going to die. She has to say goodbye to her family, and she makes it very clear that she believes in Jesus and that she's going to be going home to Jesus. So, you know, he was probably in his element at that point in time. He's forced her to write these things. She's writing about Jesus and they're going to be together in the end. And, you know, he's so delusional. And look at that. In this chart, we have Neptune, which is those delusions, in the 9th house of religion, conjunct the MC. So that shows me, and here it's formed a mystic rectangle again. He is absolutely off his rocker religiously. He's hearing voices and he thinks it's God. Okay, so he makes her write this letter on the 1st of June, 85 at 10 past 3 in the morning. And we know that because she's actually written the time that at the top of the letter. If you really want to see the letter, you can Google it and you can find it. Okay, so the whole time, basically, Larry Jean Bell has been represented by Mars. In the other charts, he's been represented by Mars. So here, Mars is in Gemini. We've gone back to the 1st of June, back to 2 weeks. So Mars hasn't moved into Cancer like it had when Debra May had been abducted. But now it's in the 3rd house of communication as well. So the perpetrator is making her communicate to her family. And now the chart is completely flipped around. We see Aries here on the ascendant, which represents what's in front of them at that particular time that this letter was written, what's in front of Shari, what's going to happen to her immediately at this time. And then the 7th house shows us what he's doing and what he feels is necessary to happen ultimately just after this time. So it sort of flips it around a bit. So now her Venus, as she was represented in the other chart, is now in the 1st house, right in front of him. He's in control, which is Aries and Mars. He has the upper hand over Venus, her. And not only that, the 7th house, which is the open enemies, is full of horrible things like Pluto, the part of fortune, and the moon there in Scorpio. Okay, so there's all these repetitive sort of patterns that are popping up. But not only that, this is really a culmination chart because it shows his religious overtones here with Neptune being in a distinct pattern with Pluto here. So destruction and death and all things nasty. And then trining 120 degrees away from Mars, which was him, the ruler of him. And then that is semi-sextiling Venus, which was the ruler of Shari Faye and Debra May, both girls. So there we have the mystic rectangle. There's 2 oppositions from Neptune to Mars and from Venus to Pluto. And then these semi-sextiles and these trines that form this picture here. So it really couldn't get any more clear at that point in time what his intentions were. He wanted her to write this letter to say goodbye to her family and basically, I think, explain away his actions. And now I've got a rooster in the background. I really apologise. So what are the reoccurring patterns that we're seeing in all of these charts? Aries or Mars, Gemini or Mercury, Libra or Venus. and the 9th house, and Neptune, which is right there conjunct the MC. So I'll flip through to the other chart and we'll look at that. Here we have him, Aries, Mars. Shari is the ascendant there in Libra, so she's Venus. And there, this pattern again is forming, but we have Neptune down here now, and Pluto here, Mars here, and Venus in the 7th. So it's very clear that these planets and these signs are being used repetitively in these charts. So it's propelling him, and the fact that he is doing these actions under a Gemini Sun, under a Gemini Mars, under a Gemini Mercury, he needs to communicate everything that he's doing, and he knew he would get caught. Inevitably, he would know. He did too many things wrong to not get caught, but he certainly tried hard. He made several phone calls to the family, and they couldn't trace it, so they had to get the FBI onto it. And you know, unfortunately, he could have been probably caught after he'd taken Shari and before he'd killed Debra May. But he was just playing these cat and mouse games with her family, even throughout the time that he took Debra May. And in fact, he had told Dawn, which is Shari Faye's sister, where Debra May was, where her body could be found. So poor Dawn Smith had to endure absolute hell through the weeks and months of from the 31st of May 1985 onwards. A lot of people and the FBI believe that the actual victim was possibly Dawn herself, because he kept on ringing up and asking for Dawn by name. So he knew her, he'd been watching them and he knew her. And perhaps the only way he could find, the best way to do it would be to get to her through her sister. And that's pretty sort of clear here as well when we've got Mercury in Gemini. You know, there's the sibling. Mercury is siblings.